Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia and today we're going to talk about continuous documentation for your code. Few words about myself. I'm a lead developer at Scoutbee and located in Berlin. I'm originally from Ukraine and living in Germany for already 5 years. And I'm a proud organizer, one of the organizers of Pi Berlin meetup. You're all invited, of course. And I have 11 years of experience in software development. And from those 11 years, I have 7 years in Python specifically. So you can imagine that I'm a happy Pythonista by now. And I would really love to share my experience with you today. If this would be an offline event, I would definitely ask you if you do document your code. Do you? I remember myself when I wrote my first program, just step by step, by the book, around 10 years ago, well, maybe 11. And it looked so perfect. It was my first piece of code, or I thought it was perfect. And it actually didn't feel right. It didn't feel finished. At that point, I didn't know what to actually check in the code, in my code, how to know when it's good enough, or when it needs more work to be ready to go into the code review. And even when I passed code review and merged it to the main branch, I was not quite sure that this code will be still good in, let's say, 5 or 6 years, or even in 1 year. And of course, I was feeling like this meme, we're where we are going. We don't need any documentation. So just 10 years later, I realized that the confidence comes with experience, with failures and successes, with learning from others and trying different approaches. But what if you could possibly travel to the future and ask your future self how to make this code better? In this talk, we will be able to experience some magic and travel to the future. So let the future begin. Let's start with the story of one little set code, which was a bit lost in its lifetime, and no one wanted to play with the set code, and it was wondering if there is a possibility to find out how to deal with new code, new services, how to talk to others, how to get new friends, and how to look at all the issues it was experiencing in retrospective. So the set code had so many questions about its lifetime and there were no answers. And there was just a sad cat sitting next to the sad code in the same room. Such a sad story. So the sad code was wondering what's wrong with it and how to change, how to find new friends. Let's take a closer look into this code. As you can see, it has two functions. The first function is just the get function, which will return hello world. Pretty clear, you can understand what does it do. Then the second function looks really weird and suspicious because there is some parameter, there is a function, there is a message, something is going on inside, and you don't really know why this parameter is there, why is there an optional parameter, and what does this function do. So clearly this code is sad because it's not so obvious what does it do and how to interact with it, and what is the purpose of this code. So as you remember our story, there was a sad code and the cat. So the code went to sleep and something magical happened. It met its future self. It met someone, and then the future self said, I will give you 4 pieces of advice which will improve your communication skills, and at the end you will have to solve a riddle. Follow my advice and reclaim the ancient knowledge to gain the programming superpower. You will shine for many, many years after that. So listen carefully. Yes, please continue, said the sad code. So the first advice showed the sad code how to use problem-oriented approach to show the world how to solve a problem if there are any in the future. Problem-oriented approach will help you to create how-to guides, which would guide the reader through one problem, which would be solvable in the end. So that means that this is like a recipe where you follow it and then you get something in the end, you get some result. In our case, adding a README file would be sort of a guide for maybe installation, maybe something else, but it would be definitely a how-to guide for this simple code, which would be a great advice and which would be a great way to start with documentation. So, after following the first advice, the set code noticed they got a friend. Can you imagine a new friend? Well, how do I know that? Just look, there is a star shining in there. The first star, the first friend, yeah, fantastic, super great. So, the second advice, show the set code how to use learning-oriented approach to show the world what the code is actually doing. These are the instructions, tutorials with clear steps which is needed to be done in order to build something or to achieve some goal. In our case, if you would like to add, for example, basic tutorial, this would be, let's say, some simple setup. So when you can follow simple steps, and this would guide you to the result, which is learning it on its own. In this case, there is a tutorial how to set up basic Sphinx setup and how to generate some documentations. Don't worry, we will go through the example in the end of this talk. So you don't need to memorize everything from the first second. And after the second step, the set code noticed that they got another friend. Look, there are 2 stars already shining. Fantastic, that's a good start. Let's keep on going. The third advice showed the set code how to use understanding-oriented approach to explain the world more about its personality and how the code feels about other services, packages, or even about integrating with others. So the explanation would add more information, would get some clarifications on some specific topics. It would broaden the coverage of all the things that this code or this specific application can do. If you follow the third advice, this sad little code could add, for example, why do we need documentation, some explanation and some motivation and even some quotes, some links to other documents. And look, there are more friends and more friends after this. So the last but not least advice showed the set code how to use information-oriented approach, which is the reference. It could be a reference guide to the code, for example, explanation how the function works, input-output parameters, results, classes, all the API descriptions, all the methods, and also how to use them. If we follow the fourth advice of the reference guide for this code, for example, we can add a code reference using Sphinx and read the docs. We will see this part in the demo as well, so don't worry about that. And after these 4 wonderful advices from the future, something truly magic happened. The code woke up and it was not sad anymore. It felt comfortable to go to the party, to meet others, to start talking to developers. And when in a few years the code finally met its creator, the developer, there was a sparkle of understanding between them, and they felt deeply connected with each other. At that moment, the code had a flashback in memory to the moment when the future self asked to solve the riddle. So here it is. I am someone who can teach you a lesson, but not a teacher. I am someone who can guide you to a goal, but not a tour guide. I'm someone who can tell you everything about technical specs of your functions, but not an encyclopedia. And I'm someone who can explain you a particular topic to help you to understand, but not Google. The code started thinking and finally realized something. So, wait, you're my future self. And were all these hints about you? All about you? So the future self answered, yes, these 4 advices were all about me. Tutorials, how-to guides, explanation, and reference guides. And are you a documentation? Asked the code. Yes, you guessed right. So you gained the ancient knowledge and you have a superpower right now. And the secret is that there isn't one thing called documentation. There are 4, and we just learned about all 4 of those. So the future is now, and you can make your code happy at any point in time with code references, then simple README file, also some tutorials about maybe basic setup, maybe some other setups, and then more explanation and motivation in your documentation. And then this code, even the saddest code in the world, can be happy, right? And the cat would be happy as well. And you can get a lot of friends on GitHub, because the more clear is it how to contribute and what is the point of contribution of this code, and then you will get more followers, you will get more people checking the project, contributing, reading, using it. Because if the code is as sad as it was in the beginning, with no clear view on what does it do and why is it even there, what is the purpose of it, then obviously you will get no friends. Let the future begin now. So, would you document your code knowing its future? Knowing that documentation can make your code shine for many years? If this example didn't convince you to start working on documentation, I have a few more bites of advice from my experience. First one is that people tend to forget things. This is our nature. We just remove information from memory that we don't use. For example, you decided to have a break. Then you switch to another project. And then you will forget something that was super important for this project, for this particular code. And when you are back, you will not be able to recall something in memory unless it's written somewhere. Then one more thing is that people leave the code alone. If you're getting bored of the team, of the project, or maybe you just need a break, you will leave the code alone for a year, for a month, for a week. It doesn't make a difference. You will still not be able to remember the same information that you had a year ago, a week ago, a month ago. This is not possible that people can remember everything and then keep it in memory for years. Obviously, it is possible for some unique people, but we are not talking about that right now. And one more is that new people are coming to the project to contribute. For example, one person left, another person came. You need to onboard new people. You need to onboard either external contributors, internal contributors. Maybe if it's a company, you still need to onboard new people into the team, even if they are moving just between the teams. If it's an open source, it's even harder because you don't talk to people directly, and if some code is magically working, for example, it has some magical numbers, this would definitely make an effect on the count of GitHub issues for your code or any other issues with the code, because people would start asking, why is this number like this specifically? Why is this function works in the way that it is? And well, documentation cannot be out of date if you don't write any. But if you decided to start adding some documentation to your code or write new code and document it, here are a few checks to make sure that you are on the right track. The first one would be choose the main source tool for documentation, and then obviously make sure that documentation is up to date. The best is to put documentation next to the code, or at least put it into one single place where developers and other people can access it easily. I recommend you to read a few articles before you start. This would be the first source. That's where I took all of those 4 types of documentation. They also have a really good documentation for their own project. You can check that as well. There are lots of examples which you can use for your project. And then one more link is where to put documentation and why do you need to have documentation. Highly recommend to read those articles first. So how to start? After this documentation talk, you just close the laptop and then you go to your code. And what do? I would suggest you to start as simple as possible, and then later on, if you're up for the challenge, to go to the version control documentation. If you're documenting your code for Python project, for example, you can start with Sphinx. And then afterwards, you can also try read the docs. If you are writing not only Python code, but some other languages, you can also try read the docs, because it's language agnostic. It's the way how you build documentation, the way how you host documentation. They do everything for you. You just need to write some simple connectors. You need to write MD files or RST files, and then it would be built automatically. You don't need to care about anything but your own documentation. How about demo? Are you up for the demo right now? Let's check the simple documentation setup which I prepared for this talk. Here is the repo which you can check later on. It has all the 4 pieces of advices which I just gave. It has even CI in place. It has read the docs connectors. It has the README. This is exactly the README which I showed for the sed code example. Here is the README which shows how to run, how to build the Docker image, how to run it, how to install all the environment. Then there is also a simple Docker file. You can read actually all of the docs from here, and you can even go to docs, see the requirements which you would need to use to build the Sphinx documentation. You can check all the source codes. I am using RST, but you can also use the Markdown. You can check all of the documentation for explanation guides, then tutorials, some tutorials. And you can also check this magic in here. There is also one really nice tool which will check your documentation coverage, which is called Interrogate. It works for this particular application. You can set up all the sentences in the TOML file. You can set how many percent would you like to have covered for the documentation. For example, I have 80%, and then I would not be able to pass the CI if the code doesn't have enough documentation. It does check the doc strings in every file, and if you want to check application and then how the code reference looks like, here it is. There is a simple docstring for this function and for the file itself. Obviously, there are no input output arguments, so there is no documentation inside, but you can also put it there. How do you work with read the docs? There are two versions. One is open source, which is 100% free, which is readthedocs.org. And then there is a readthedocs.com, which would be a paid-for solution for companies. So then your documentation would be hidden unless you work in a specific company. It can also take all the hidden repos from GitHub, and then you can build all the builds automatically. You can go and check the versions, how the build went, and you can also see the documentation. So here is my perfect documentation for the simple application which has one function, hello world. There is a code reference. Basically, this is what I showed you before. Then explanation, some information to read, also some motivation, then some tutorials, how-to guides, and basically everything that we would need would be here in this one single place, which is read the docs. And let me go back to my presentation. So here is the link where you can access the demo. You can access all of the simple docs, go through all the documentation which is in there, all the links, all the sources, and then try to build the same for your documentation. But the last but not least, what I wanted to say, you can force people to write documentation, right? It is easy, you can add interrogate, but you cannot force people to read documentation, which is a problem. So I would suggest you to make documentation as a part of your culture, of the team culture, of the company culture, to read documentation. And if documentation is in one place, which is not Confluence, or it could be Confluence, but it has to be one place. If you have 4 different places, 5 different places, then remember, people tend to forget. So then people will forget where documentation is. And they will ask each other, where can I get this advice? Where can I get that advice? How to do this? How to do that? But if it's one single place, especially when you can search through this documentation, this would be the most valuable documentation which you could suggest to build. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for following this talk with me. Thank you for inspiring and inviting me for giving this talk. And I would really love to hear back your success or failure stories about documentation and also feedback about this talk. You can find me in my website or you can find me in GitHub. And definitely you're all invited for the Piperly meetup. So thank you.